Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Hill Shadows podcast. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm here with Ashley, and we will be your hosts for tonight. If you guys like the strange, unusual, paranormal, that kind of thing, hit the subscribe button. That's the kind of content we cover here. And it's kind of crazy outside. We got some really strange weather here. I think last week when we were on here, it was like negative 30 degrees outside. Well, this week it was like 70 today almost. Which is good if you like being sick, I guess, and if you like crazy weather, because apparently we might definitely have some rain coming in, and maybe some even worse weather headed our way. Well, let's hope not. We're gonna pray that things turn out differently than what they're expecting.
What do you mean worse weather? Like snow again?
No, like the storms
Yeah.
Sorry. That could move in where the warm weather clashes with the cold weather. Yeah, it's just a mess. Anyway, hopefully you guys are having a wonderful New Year's weekend and Happy New Year's, because I'm sure it's gonna be 2023 by the time you guys are hearing this, which is crazy to think because seems like I was just getting ready for Christmas, and now Christmas was a week ago. I don't know, man. Time just moves too quickly for my liking.
Stops for no man.
The older I get, the faster it moves, and I dislike it very much. Anyway, before I get started, if you guys have any encounters you would like to share with us, you can email those to us at hillshadowsky@yahoo.com, and we will share them on an upcoming episode. If you don't want us to mention your name, we won't do that. Just, make sure you mention it in the email. Last week, we were talking about gnomes. It was Christmas time. Santa has elves. We got to looking into that kind of phenomenon. We came up with some pretty interesting stories. And the one that was really long that I covered, I'm going to finish that tonight. And it seemed like it really got out there, but some of these things do seem like they're kind of outlandish. I don't remember exactly where I stopped, so I'm just going to start at the second part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here I go. If you guys want reference for this, you can hear the first part that I go over in our last episode, which was episode 30. And we have all those in a playlist. You guys can check that out.
I'm invested at this point, and I need to know.
So yeah, if you guys want to hear the whole story, check out part 1 on episode 30, and this is part 2. The title of the whole story is Gnomes Are Real and They're Scary Little Assholes. Now, part 2 is I visited the subterranean kingdom of the gnomes. Some secrets are best left buried. As always, we'll leave any kind of reference links down in the description so you guys can check them out for yourselves if you want to, but here we go. The third hole sat even farther back in the yard and was also guarded. I don't know if the sentinels had always been there or if they'd been summoned following my actions at the first hole, but there they stood, one each atop a strange, root-entwined cairn, their black eyes staring daggers at me as I approached. I hadn't expected to actually fight any of these little things. I figured that, like the last one, any more I encountered would simply flee into their holes upon sighting me. But these two apparently had other plans. Their swarthy, diminutive bodies stood there ready for combat. They weren't armed, but it was plain that they planned to confront me. I remembered the screams I'd heard when pouring the acid into the hole, and the weird, linguistically incomparable words of the creature who'd fled. Both had sounded eerily human, albeit pitched appropriately to their doll-like statures. Shrill voices that had sounded wild, yet somehow intoned with a symbiance or derivation of humanity. I stopped my approach about 10 feet from the cairns and waited to see if the two creatures would attempt some form of communication. I figured that if I had to, I could uncork the acid and splash a little in their direction. If it didn't kill, it'd at least scare them away, ideally back into their holes, at which point I could just pour the rest of the stuff inside. But neither of the little demon-eyed things moved. Their chest-embedded faces merely stared, grimacingly evil, unblinking, knowing that I'd have to deal with them all if I wanted to collect my payment. I decided to take the initiative and engage the little pests first. As smoothly as I could, I removed the lid, my eyes never leaving my small-framed foes. When the lid was off, I took a breath and then, as fast as I could manage, arched the container quickly in front of me, sending a stream of the strange homemade acid toward the two cairn-perched creatures. One, perhaps not expecting me to actually fight in open ground, flinched upon seeing the liquid, and a moment later it was writhing on the ground, having fallen from its veritable guard tower upon being splashed with the acid. The other, faster than his companion, had leapt backwards just before being touched, and quickly rounded the cairn, crawling and galloping on all fours towards me. I was too appalled by the sight of the dying gnome to immediately react to the assault of his comrade. Before I could turn and sling out another splash, the gnome was upon me. Its little hands, three-fingered I noticed for the first time, sank into my hand and squeezed with a strength I wouldn't have thought it capable. When I involuntarily fell to my knees, the gnome used its disproportionate strength to swat away the container of acid, sending it sliding across the grass. Then, with practiced swiftness, it delivered a crushing blow to my temple, and the last thing I saw was the acid steadily pouring out of the container onto the grass, and the subsequent plume of smoke as the caustic substance ate through the earth. As darkness enveloped me, a shrill tittering filled my ears, the high-pitched cackles of some fledgling imp newly loosed from hell to carry out its diabolic deeds. It's hard for me to relate the events that followed, but I will so that others may be warned. I awoke in a place I can only incompletely describe as dank, murky, incomprehensibly spacious, yet paradoxically suffocating. There was a sourceless yet omnipresent wetness, as if the very walls were salivating, inexhaustibly, some kind of transparent slime. I was lying on my back on a bed of soft black soil. Though the environment around me was plainly rock, hardened sediment, and what appeared to be long streaks of floor-buried bone, or some whitish deposit. As I mentioned, the space was huge, cavernous. I was granted a sense of its enormity by the ostensibly intentional placement of glowing, shell-like projections throughout, some affixed to the walls nearest to me, others twinkling off in the far-flung distance like stars, millions of miles away in the black gulf of outer space. It was psychologically oppressive, simply waking up and beholding the sheer grandeur of this subterranean domain. The impossibility of it hurt my head, made me feel woozy and nauseous when looked upon for more than a few moments at a time. I sat up, hoping that I wouldn't lose consciousness from the sudden exertion. When my head settled a little and I could look around without much disorientation, I tried to spot some kind of natural tunnel or gnome-built passageway, any point of egress that could take back me to the mentally palatable surface, or at least to some place less spatially irreconcilable. Finally, when my eyes had adjusted to the hazy, ever-shifting, sporadically lit murk, I spotted a small opening in a wall to my left, down a short declivity from my position. The space was about knee-high but rounded, clearly having been carved by a tool of some kind, rather than the result of natural erosion in the rock wall. With a last fearful glance at the inverted, star-scattered abyss above, I got on my hands and knees, and hoping against hope, crawled into the circular aperture. After what could have been seconds or minutes of dust-choked, claustrophobia-inducing crawling, my mind was still reeling from the unreality of my Tartarian plunge. I emerged into a space that was even more mystifying and sense-defying than the area from which I had come. I stood and dusted myself off, not for care of my clothing and cleanliness. My clothes had long since been soiled and tattered beyond repair, but simply to give the more refined parts of my mind something to focus on, lest they irretrievably recoil inward at the baffling architectural horror before me. Words such as cavernous, vast, and sprawling are pitifully inadequate in describing this ultra-spatial subterranean region. I had somehow gone from a huge yet at least abstractly fathomable cave to an inner world, a chthonic realm within the bowels of the great earth, a world which had apparently been peopled at some far-flung point in the past by builders of an architectural inclination both brilliant and horrific. The structures that towered before me or lay sunken and crumbled were stupefying in their enormity and somehow revolting in their design. Cryptic organizations of roughly edged, multifaceted buildings, titan, exteriorly stared yet windowless spires that somehow managed to stand atop the thinnest pillars or platforms, conical and pyramidal bases that couldn't have supported anything so hulking and weighty had they been built atop the surface by human hands. And all of it every leaning, crack-strewn surface, every impossibly upright edifice, every half-buried monument, was comprised of a faintly luminous stone, some ultra-resilient, dimly twinkling sediment which couldn't have came from anywhere but such a terrestrial, distant environment as the centermost portions of the earth, if not from some wholly separate sphere far beyond it. I stood atop what could have been a cliff at some point far in the distant past, or perhaps simply the feature effaced roof of a building that had sunken indistinguishably into a natural wall, becoming a single Aeonian structure. Despite my aforementioned revulsion at the bizarre, megalith-ridden Acropolis, I felt that I had to push on, that if there were any pathways to the surface, an idea which seemed almost comically absurd, given the I can't pronounce that, preternatural, sky-like darkness that hung above the time-forsaken city. They'd lie somewhere amidst the ancient dissolution and dereliction before me. Stumbling, I couldn't have told you the last time I'd eaten or drank anything. I thoughtlessly carried my body down the cliff, traversing as best I could on the ever-crumbling, dust-capped steps. Eventually, I reached a somewhat level surface and judged that I had arrived at what would have been a street centuries, if not longer ago. Standing level with it, I cowered a little before the colossal towers, shrunk away from the immemorial ageness apparent on every surface, peered with a vague, unrelatable unease at the thick, fulsome shadows, which seemed to somehow lengthen or shorten on their own volition, despite the photic stagnancy of the luminous ore. With a terror-weakened mind and exhaustion-stricken body, I lurched and ambled through that long-dead city, intermittently marveling and gasping in awe and horror whenever some singular and incredible wonder revealed itself to me as I rounded corners and clambered over collapsed, unnameable things. The instinctively recognizable of communal death and widespread corruption filled my nostrils and my mind, in a state of advanced mental debility. Conjured and projected phantoms and ghouls in the depths of shadows, but I saw no actual signs of life, nor any evidence that it had ever existed within the sub-mundane city. It was as if those looming palatial structures had been built by immaterial entities who, upon finishing their construction, simply vanished, leaving shadows to tenant the vacancies. The long-deserted and sunless city was naturally windless, lacking anything in the way of a microcosmic atmosphere, and yet a chill arose and deepened not long into my trek through its winding alleys and intermittently slanting boulevards, as if I traveled through varying climes and biomes despite the seamless transition from block to ancient block. Some day, when the still lingering fog of horror has receded a little from my mind, I hope to recall and transcribe the finer details of my memories from that unreal voyage. But for now, I can only say that this city, built well beneath the crust of earth, was amazing, geologically perplexing, and nightmarish beyond tolerance. Somehow, after a span of time I won't even try to estimate, I arrived at the opposite side of the corpseless necropolis. I was inexpressibly tired, had pushed my body and mind to degrees of exertion unprecedented for myself and perhaps any other man of my general lifestyle. Peering around, I saw only more of the grander cave's interior. Shockingly, illogically vast, almost void-like, and I wondered how any civilization could have thrived or even existed for more than a little while under such abyssal and gloomy conditions. Shuffling onward, more so through a robotic automation than any conscious impulse, I reached a broad, far-climbing staircase, roughly hewn and broken in many places, not unlike the one by which I had descended into the age-warped city. Standing atop the faraway pinnacle was a figure, and my mind, added as it was the extremity of my exhaustion, didn't immediately recognize it. Hastening on, thinking that perhaps someone had dared the hypogeal perils to rescue me, I practically crawled on hands and knees up the stairs, heedless of the scrapes and bruises acquired. It was only when I had gone halfway up that I recognized the figure for what it really was, and by then it was too late to retreat. I'd exerted all my efforts in my ascent, and knew that what remained of my strength would be needed just to cling to the ruinous, perilously inclined steps. Standing there, its beady, hateful eyes looking down into my own, was the creature, the horrific gnome I had tried to kill back on the surface. For a moment, there was only silence. I knew that if this thing wanted to, it could kill me. Its comparatively smaller size at the point was irrelevant. I was simply too tired, had been sapped of so much strength that even the feeblest blow would have sent me falling backwards down that warped staircase. Yet despite the hatred I sensed in its chest-set face, the thing did not make a move to shove me back, nor did it show any intimate intimation that it intended me harm. Its body language, what I could discern of it, seemed anticipatory, more than anything, as if it were waiting on me to act, or at least attempt communication. At that point I was tired enough to go along with anything, even the pre-execution formalities or whimsy of a freakishly small horror, so I said, with a throat that was dry as the dead world behind me, "What do you want?" The thing chirped and croaked and tittered, a series of wholly unfamiliar and uncognizable sounds issuing from the lipless mouth on its chest-mounted face. As I'm sure anyone who has ever been extremely tired and forced to carry out some seemingly useless dialogue can attest to, a frustration mounted within me. I couldn't understand the thing, and was certain that its mere proximity to the great city meant that it possessed some level of intelligence, and therefore had to know that I wouldn't understand its monstrous language. Its ignorance to this, or unwillingness to accept this, angered me, and this anger galvanized my weak body. I rose to stand and stomped up toward the thing, fist balled and brow furrowed. In response, the little monster shuffled backwards on the summit, giving me space to stand. But it did not run away, had only retreated enough to allow me to stand comfortably away from the precipitous edge. I found myself further angered by its lack of fear in the face of a much larger foe, even though I was plainly exhausted and hadn't had anything in the way of rest or sustenance in hours. Still, I thought it in a less articulate way. Such things shouldn't be have mattered. It should still be scared of me, a giant by comparison. But before I could muster the strength to lash out, verbally or physically, the gnome raised one of its stubby hands and gestured behind me. I followed its open palm to the gray-draped cityscape and then watched as it approached the edge of the cliff. Its attention focused on the darkness-piercing spires. For a brief moment, I considered lashing out with my foot and kicking the thing off the edge. Even imagined how its tiny voice would sound echoing infinitely into the skyward void as it plunged to the ground below. But something about its posture, the suggestion of reverence in its squat, swarthy body, stayed my foot, and I instead approached the edge to stand abreast with it. We stood there alongside one another for a few moments, gazing silently on that dark, unpeopled city, until the gnome finally turned to me with an expression of unmistakable melancholy on its tragically inhuman face. And despite our obvious differences in morphology and physiognomy, I recognized without a shred of doubt the pain in those ebon eyes, the long-held grief that had for countless solitary cycles weighed heavily upon its heart. Trusting me not to attack it, or perhaps no longer caring for its safety in my presence, it turned its back to me and began digging in the ashen ground of the cliff summit. While it worked, I turned my gaze again to that darkly pallid palatial kingdom, when its marmoreal surfaces shadow-warded porticos and lifeless, broadly laid street, and wondered at what kind of race could have inhabited such a huge, humanly inconceivable environment. Finally, it chirped, and I went over to see what it had unearthed on the rock. But I saw that it hadn't been digging, but etching something into the ground, inscribing upon the rock itself a long series of images and symbols, none of which I recognized, but were nonetheless visually alluring, mentally stimulating. Like the hieroglyphs upon some ancient Egyptian mural, the images carved into the ground showed a sequence of events, told a story of some kind. The gnome, its face still contorted by its implacable grief, stood aside to allow me a full view of the imagery. My eyes followed the chronology, presuming that it flowed from left to right, and I quickly realized with a sympathetic disquietude that I was looking at a representation of the city's downfall. And then, the ultimate truth of it all, the breath-catching reality of my unreal situation, finally dawned on me. In some former time, well before God or the protomorphic slimes had reared man upon the earth, there existed a race of highly intelligent subterranean beings, who had dwelt and flourished for untold epochs within the smoldering interior of the nascent earth. These beings, according to the hastily inscribed hieroglyphs, built the great city before me, and had for a short while peopled it. But then some cataclysm or annihilating event had swept through and eradicated nearly the entirety of the primordial race. The gnome had drawn figures, locked in the throes of agony, some individually, others entangled with each other, and entire crowds of the ancient people were depicted in great heaps and hordes of congregate violence, clashing and grappling insensibly, savagely, as if the entire civilization had turned upon itself in wild civil unrest. And so much time had passed since this seemingly self-inflicted annihilation that not even the ashes of their bones remained amidst the empty streets and buildings. But that wasn't all that related through the crude imagery and suggestive symbols. They also told of a subsequent happening, a contagion or malady of some kind that afflicted the few remaining members of that ill-fortuned race. This disease had caused them to shrink, to literally collapse upon themselves until they were naught but twisted, rudimentary versions of their former selves. Diminutive, spite-filled gnomes. The stony pictograph ended with a small collection of surviving gnomes, a handful of vanguards left to watch over the city that no longer, and would never again, need their protection. Deeply troubled, and now sharing more than a little of the impish creature's melancholy, I turned away from the carving and addressed its forlorn artist. "You're one of the last, aren't you? A historian or protector of all this. But why have you come to the surface? I can understand if you'd like to leave, to escape this gloomy place, but why do so in such mischievous, pestilential ways? I was hired to exterminate you because you've been causing havoc for those on the surface." I didn't actually expect my words to have any meaning to the creature. I was merely voicing the confusion at the whole thing that had emerged in my mind following the retelling of its race's fate. But to my surprise, the little being formed its hands into a circle and raised its arms high above its head, situating the hand-formed shape above the looming buildings where it had been sullenly gazing earlier. For a moment, I stared, not comprehending the meaning. But then, when taking in the dismal environment and the stagnant deadness of it all, I finally understood its meaning. The circle it had formed with its hands was the sun, positioned above the ever-shaded city. Of course, the sun, something that was undoubtedly as marvelous and too incredible to as its city was to me. The gnome was drawn to it, probably mesmerized by it. Its somewhat barbarous and invasive actions on the surface had no doubt been partially caused by some kind of solar delirium, a sun-induced mania. It was understandable, this thing that had only known the dim mortuary illumination of an underground metropolis. I sighed, my exhaustion returning me in full force, and I sat down beside the gnome. It turned to me, its eyes pleading some request I thought that I understood, and then walked over toward the rear of the summit, which sat against a greater rock face. There, it pressed against a portion of the wall, and a great portion, imperceptibly outlined, then slid inward and revolved, leaving in its wake a dark tunnel. Turning, the gnome then beckoned me to rise and follow, and I did, joining it in that dark passageway like an undead thrall obeying a necromantic summons. After an interim of alternately crawling and hiking that was both inestimable and silent, we emerged onto the surface, and I thought for a moment that the gnome had instead led me to the molten furnace of the earth's core. I must have gone without the sun's natural brilliance and warmth for longer than I'd thought, because the totality of its light was blinding, terrifying, and I nearly even fled back into the cold darkness of the sloping tunnel. But the fresh air, the scent of nearby flowers, and growths of a natural, livelier order anchored me, and my eyes quickly adjusted to the beauteous light and invigorating radiance of the life-giving star. Saying nothing, the gnome strode away, and I dazedly watched as he collected what remained of his fallen comrades. Gathering ash and bone, he dumped the collected artifacts into the holes nearest them, and then sealed the openings with dirt. Once its sepulchral tasks had been completed, it sang, in its tinny, aberrant voice, some mournful dirge. I stood and listened with as much solemnity as I could manage, given my glee at finally being back on the surface. He then returned to me and let out a few chirps, their import obvious given the circumstances. I nodded and wished him well in his life above ground. He took one last look into the hole from which we had come, and then piled dirt into the opening, which was quickly packed in due to the abrupt curvature of the tunnel. After that, he walked off toward the far end of the yard and shortly disappeared into the unclaimed woodland beyond. I spent a few more moments basking in the sunlight, allowing it to somewhat rejuvenate my wearied form. Then, with a mind resolved on collecting payment for a job done, I marched toward the Connor's house to announce that I had got rid of the vermin. And that's the conclusion of that story. I was pretty out there, man. A subterranean, some type of ancient city that was supposedly enormous beneath there.
Right.
I know a lot of people talk about inner Earth, and there have been supposed like explorers that have came across things that supposedly were underground, but yet had like lakes or oceans, and just like something you would see above ground. So
well, there are. In fact, there was a cave found. I can't remember where it's at. I can't remember. That's unfortunate, but it has a river within it. It's got its own ecosystem in it.
I think that's kind of
It's supposed to be very lush and green. It's supposedly beautiful.
I think I was telling you about the crater Earth theory. Was that today maybe or something?
Yesterday.
I really couldn't find too much about it, but it's something like we're inside of, like the Earth is supposedly way, way bigger than anybody says it is, and we're like down in one of the Earth's craters or something.
I mean,
I don't know. Who knows?
I guess it's possible. I don't know.
It's possible. If you guys could explain that to me in more detail, I would love to hear how it actually goes. I couldn't really find out a whole lot about it. Anyway, that's the conclusion of my gnome tales.
Either this dude has the most amazing story,
I mean, you can tell
or lived
he's
the most
a really
amazing
good
story,
writer. It's well written.
or he's a fantastic storyteller.
Either way, it's a pretty cool story, man. I dig it.
Yeah,
I like
not bad.
it. It's not bad. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I got another one I want to share, but I will let Ashley share.
Well, I'll
hers.
tell you, I'm having a bit of an issue.
Well, if you're having an issue, I can go.
Hold on, it might work. Okay, it's gonna work.
Okay.
That's why my phone was making so many noises. I was trying to restart it because it absolutely was not trying to connect to the internet.
Well, we'll have Ashley share hers first, and then I've got one coming out in Nebraska, and it's interesting. It's not really long, but I'll let her go first, and then I'll share the other encounter I have.
Okay, so again, this is just an article that I found, and it's about a couple families actually that had some encounters.
All right, let's hear it.
So let's see. I'm trying to figure out where I should start reading at, so I'm not just reading the entire thing. All right, well, I'll start here. The first account here of a family, this was in California.
All right.
The first account here of a family that was plagued by an apparent gnome has a decidedly ominous overtone. The story starts with a woman known only as Tammy, who moved with her 3 children to a rural farmhouse near the town of Porterville, California, just off the Tool River, around 2004. Things got weird almost immediately, as Tammy claimed that she often felt the heavy sense of being watched, at times almost feeling the gravity of eyes upon her, but there was never anyone around during these episodes. It did not take long for her to realize that this phenomenon had happened most often and most intensely when she was near the barn, which sat in a secluded corner of the rather large 100-acre property. Indeed, in the coming days, the barn took on quite a sinister air, seeming to emanate a cold chill, a thick sense of dread, and having the habit of spooking the many animals that the family owned, including dogs, a cat, chickens, turkeys, and even a duck. Although they tended to wander all over the property, none of these animals would go anywhere near the barn, as if repelled by some unseen force lodged within. Indeed, Tammy observed that none of the neighbors' animals, strays, or wildlife would go near the spooky old barn either. Whenever any animals passed the barn, they would give it a wide berth, and on many occasions would act strangely in its presence, staring at it as if something were there staring back. The dogs would sometimes go nuts around the barn, barking and yipping excitedly, even though no one was there. Sometimes there could be heard strange noises coming from within the barn, which sounded like grunts, growls, and squeals. To add a layer to the thickening air of the foreboding, Tammy claimed that she began to notice several of her animals had begun to go missing, gone without a trace, and it was immediately suspected that the menacing barn had something to do with it. Tammy chalked it all up to the nerves and perhaps rats or wildlife nesting in the barn, and explained the missing animals away as having just run off or even being killed by coyotes. But one frightening encounter would convince her that it was something more than that. One evening, Tammy returned from town with her son and parked the car. But as she exited the vehicle and went to get some groceries out of the trunk, she claims that she saw fleeting movement in the periphery of her vision. When she looked up, there was nothing there. She went back to unloading the groceries, but almost immediately there was another movement, this time punctuated by an insidious laugh. Standing there, around 50 yards away, was what she described as a humanoid creature about 3 foot tall, which sported a beard and was wearing baggy black pants, a gold-colored shirt, and a red pointy cap. For a moment, it just stood there, staring at her and her son with deep-set, dead black eyes, as if studying them. But then things took a turn for the sinister. Tammy would say, hold on, that just repeated the same exact thing. Well, I don't know why that's like that. Okay, this time I heard a very freaky, very evil sounding chuckle. I looked in the direction of the sound, and standing there, about 50 yards from my son and I, was what I can only describe as a gnome. That thing grinned at us, and the creepy grin spread from ear to ear, and its teeth were a gross brown and pointed or jagged. It had a bulbous nose and large, deep-set eyes, though I really couldn't tell the color of them. I never got a closer look at it, and don't know if it was wearing shoes or not, because at that moment I dropped my groceries and grabbed my son and ran for the house. As soon as Tammy and her son had entered the house and slammed the door behind them, she began frantically telling her daughters about what happened between deep gasps. Somewhere outside the strange little man was still cackling, and there was a movement by the window. The terrified family looked out to see what it was, and as they approached the window, they could see the top of the red pointed cap loom into view, which was especially odd considering this particular window was located around 8 feet over the ground. Tammy closed the blinds, moved her children well away from the window, and waited there breathlessly until the thing finally went away. This would be the only direct sighting of the evil gnome, but Tammy would occasionally hear that same ominous chuckling issuing forth from the shunned barn. She would later say, "After that night, whenever the dogs barked or howled, we were pretty sure we knew what they were barking at. We were also pretty sure of where our missing poultry had gone. From time to time, we would hear a weird, creepy chuckle and other noises coming from that old barn." Tammy and her family would eventually move away. But interestingly, this is not the end of the story. A curious thing about this case is that at the time, this family had no idea that the previous family had experienced similar bizarre incidents, and she would later learn that there had been others in the same area who had encounters with the same sort of creature. In the meantime, she would continue to experience strange phenomena regarding the gnome even after moving. She would elaborate on all of this in a comment on this site, Weird Fresno, in which she says, "I called it a gnome, as that's what it resembles to me. I did move, but only about a half a mile down the road, and still with the Tull River running behind us. I did not know when I moved here that some of my neighbors had experiences with a creepy gnome way before I told my story. They were run out of the river by the thing twice at 2 different locations. Well, for the past several months, we've started having the same experiences we did at the other place. We've heard the creepy cackling laugh and heard something running around the house. One night, I was lying on the couch. I heard something running very fast across my front deck. It hit the gate so hard that it flew end over end. The thing running was too heavy to be a cat, but too fast to be a human. Another night, I was lying on the couch and noticed something moving out the corner of my eye on the deck. The many blinds were down, but not shut, and I saw that creepy gnome or red hat standing next to a shelf on my deck where I kept my yard ornaments, fairies, and things like that, which have gone missing. I closed the slats on the mini blinds with my hand, but the curtain was pulled away from the slider, and I did not see it, but I knew that it was looking at me through the open curtain. I tried to lie really still, and when my grandson came in, I told him what happened, and he pulled the curtain closed. He looked around outside, but only found some small footprints on a white shelf that is in our storage shed. So the thing is still here and terrorizing me and my neighbors. A new family moved into Tammy's previous house in 2010. And adding to the whole bizarre story is that in 2011, author and paranormal investigator Jason Offit got into contact with one of the new owners of the house, a Charlie Thomas, who also had her own strange story to tell, claiming that her and her family were also being terrorized by a gnome-like creature. She claimed that the family had been taunted with eerie singing or chanting coming from outside of their windows at night. And they too immediately noticed that there was something weird going on with that decrepit old barn. It would only escalate from there. One evening, in the early morning hours, the couple woke to the sound of a raspy, gurgling singing, which chilled them to the bone. When they looked out the window, they could see standing by a small pond on the property a creature standing around 3 foot in height and wearing maroon pants and a baggy yellow shirt with a brown vest and a dark waistcoat. The thing was described as having a bushy gray beard and wearing a tall, pointed, reddish hat. The eyes of the being were said to be small and black, and its teeth were discolored, jagged and sharp, to the point of looking almost broken. The creature seemed to know it was being watched, and apparently stared right back at them before snatching one of the expensive koi fish they had stocked the pond with and jamming it into its mouth with glee. The husband allegedly shouted at it to go away, and it actually apparently gave him the finger before running off while laughing.
Oh, wow.
When the area was examined later, a set of footprints were found that were about the size of a child's. Charlie Thomas would say of all this encounter. It was without a doubt the most hideous sound I have ever heard. It freaked us out. Standing by my pond, holding one of my garden gnomes was what I can only describe as something out of a Grimm's fairy tale. The thing that was standing in our yard was hideous and grotesque. It stood illumined under the motion detector light. It was less than 3 foot tall, had a long gray beard, wore maroon pants, a baggy yellow shirt, brown vest, and dark waistcoat. I couldn't tell if it was wearing shoes or not, but it was wearing a reddish brown pointed hat. The thing that made this creature...
It left a footprint, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't wearing shoes.
Yeah, I guess not.
Not that time.
Well, this is just him, I guess, telling his part.
Oh, okay.
The thing that made this creature really hideous was its eyes and teeth. It looked like it was grinning, and its teeth were jagged and pointed. The eyes were little, beady, dark, and mean. That thing, gnome, troll, whatever it was, knew we were looking at it, and it reached into the pond and grabbed a koi right there in front of us. It dropped it in its mouth and swallowed it. We had noticed that every time we put fish in the pond, they disappeared, and we thought it was cats or raccoons eating them. After seeing that, I think that creepy little creature was the guilty party.
Oh, yeah, I would have to say so.
This thing apparently really liked that pond because it would purportedly be seen there numerous times, always in the early morning hours around 3 a.m., and often eating the fish within. It also, rather amusingly, seemed to like playing with the garden gnome decorations that had been set up there, sometimes even vandalizing. Fed up with this strange intruder, the husband then apparently took away the lawn ornaments and fish, which caused the gnome to one night throw a tantrum, stomping about and shouting out in some garbled, bizarre language. The thing would skirt around the house, banging on the walls and testing the locked doors at night. Almost always at 3 a.m., Thomas would say. One night, after we had removed the fairies and gnomes and fish from the yard, the creature showed up at the usual time, 3 a.m. When it showed up and found that the yard ornaments were gone and the fish were gone, it went crazy. It was yelling and screaming, something that we couldn't understand. But we did understand that this thing was pissed and wanted us to know it. We had put a doggy door on the back door, and it was big enough for our dogs to go through, and it would be big enough for that creature to go through as well. I took off running down the kitchen, and as I got there, the dogs had started barking like crazy at the doggy door. If that creature can run, half fly around the house. It was probably capable of flying up to the windows. A fear hit me like nothing I'd ever felt, and I ran back up to the twins' bedroom where they were both sound asleep in their cribs. The last we heard of that creature was a very loud screeching, cackling sound. It was under one of the living room windows, and when my husband went to check it out, he saw the top of the creature's hat under the window. Right then, we decided that we were out of there. We couldn't stay there with that creature. The Thomases would then move away, perhaps a wise decision, and that was that. The fact that two separate families who didn't know each other have reported the same thing seems to give this case a bit of weight, but it still does nothing to explain what the offending creature could possibly be. Yeah.
Wow.
What do you think?
I wonder if it's some kind of, if that's how it projects itself or something. Like, because
What do you mean,
about
like
it.
visually?
Why would a creature wear a pointy red hat?
What's the point of the pointy red hat?
What purpose does it serve? Why are you gonna exist anywhere and be like, my life would be a lot easier if I had a pointed red hat? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Maybe it's to give them height, to make them seem bigger than they are.
You know, I guess maybe.
I don't know any other reason for it. I don't know what's under that hat.
I'll tell you one thing that did cross my mind is I have found small children-like footprints.
Yeah, it is very strange.
I went, when I hiked with my dad at down in Berea. I don't remember the name of it. It's in one of the videos we have.
Uh-huh.
I actually got video of it. I found a little footprint.
Do you not remember the feet print that we found down there on our property?
Yeah, we found
like right there at the end of the trail where it curves up to go around to your mom.
I've seen a few things down there that might lend credence to the gnome, or the
something
gnome
small.
There's something small, yeah.
Huh.
But yeah, have you guys had any experiences with any small humanoid-like creatures? We would definitely love to hear about it. You can email that to us at hillshadowsky@yahoo. I don't think I have another one, but I think I'm just going to save it till next week because
those were both pretty long.
Those were both pretty long, and we've been on the topic of gnomes again, and if I do mine,
it's fascinating to me. I've never put much thought into it.
I don't want to throw it off, right?
What do you mean?
I don't want to throw. I got another story, but it has nothing to do with gnomes.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a small little thing.
It could have something.
If I can find out where the heck I put my screenshot at.
But this one, I think the one I have is probably longer than I want to. It's not terribly long, but
right.
I think we've been going kind of.
Okay. Well, do you want me to read this?
Yeah, go for it.
It's really short little thing. I actually, while trying to research things about gnomes, I found a thread that had
like other people commenting.
Yeah, there wasn't much on there. It was mainly people just commenting on like a couple stories.
As well.
This is what it says. We used to live on the edge of a cornfield. I was like 8 and my brother was 5. I was out running around in the backyard with my brother, doing kid stuff on the edge of the field. I noticed this little dude. My mom had pretty much beaten in the thought of stranger danger, so I kind of backed away. At that moment, my brother realized there was a person there too, and he ran over. I chased after him in fear for my brother, and as we approached this guy, it was a literal effing gnome. He had a sack full of corn. Apparently, this effer had been running around the field, plucking this corn right off the stalk. He handed my brother a corn cob and said something along the lines of, "Ye burnish," and ran back into the field. We told our mom, and she wouldn't let us go back outside and play for the rest of the year. That's it.
Oh, well, I'm convinced that there are gnomes out there now, so I don't know, man. I don't know how much time you guys spend out in nature or whatever, but man, there's some crazy stuff out there. So
yeah.
Keep that in mind when you go out. That you don't know everything, and that our physics don't explain everything. So
no, and also, well, like I was telling you earlier, I read a little story that I think it was really old, but this girl went and stayed with them and was there for a little more than 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And when she came back, she had been gone for over 7 years.
Right. Yeah, their time works different
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, I think it probably factors in heavily on people who go missing under those circumstances, because if it
They're in
really
another
is
realm.
different, they could be gone for a few hours in
Mm-hmm.
their mind, and we're sitting here watching Dave Paulides talk about them years later.
Oh, yeah, we watched that documentary.
We did. We
The new
wanted
one?
to talk about that a little bit, and I guess that's how we'll end the podcast. We'll take it off talking about that. We watched the new Missing 411 documentary titled The UFO Connection. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. There's
Probably.
a series of documentaries. I'm sure you probably have. If you found us, most likely you know who Dave Paulides is. If not, you can check him out. He's got a series called Missing 411. These people,
some of the best documentaries out right
they're
now.
really
in my opinion.
good. The first two are free, and there's a newer one that, as of the 27th, you can at least rent it, and you can purchase it digitally on most platforms. But I don't know if I would say it's my favorite one, but it's good. It's interesting.
It's good.
And I think he's finally trying to put together some sort of theory on what he thinks is happening to these people, and I don't know how much sense it makes, but
I don't know that he's trying to put what he
it seems like
but
seems like he's leaning towards the multi-dimensional theory. Like there are multi-dimensional beings that exist, and well, I think that's what he's leaning towards.
Yeah, but I don't know, because he's very big into saying something like that to like these people's families.
Well, he's
pretty bizarre sounding.
He's always saying that people get dropped somewhere, and that he's got the case of Carl Higdon, and this guy he's a hunter, and he's out in the Medicine Bow area.
Don't tell too much.
I'm not gonna tell too much. This is it's a small part of the documentary.
Yeah, but it's a big part.
It's an important part. But yeah, this guy has some crazy stuff happen to him, and
I mean, you can research it. A lot of people probably know about it.
He kind of bases the theory off of the one guy, because this guy is here to talk about it, right? Like all the other people's not. They're not here to speak. So it's pretty interesting what he has to say, and it's pretty convincing. I'm definitely convinced, but you and I both have seen UFOs right out here.
Yeah, but you could also watch one of the other missing ones and fully be convinced that it's something else as well.
Well, I tend to think that there probably are multiple things at play, but it seems to me like everything that we discuss here is all tied together. Like, as weird as it is to think, like the UFO thing and paranormal, like ghosts and things, are very closely related.
Sure.
Like, a lot of people say that when there are UFOs above, people below them will have like encounters with like strange phenomena, like
or lights,
maybe that, or lights flickering,
right,
or orbs, or hearing people talk, or whatever. Just like the activity people would describe as poltergeist. Like,
I don't know, but I would love to figure it out.
And it's all tied in together. Whatever it is that we can't grasp or put together about this stuff, is if we could just get the one piece, I feel like it would bring everything together. And it probably does have something to do with like the multi-dimensional thing, right? Because
probably
we only see
that's what I've always thought.
in the dimension we see in, and we have
with
time and space the way we see it. And if you can alter space and time in any way, then you probably got a way of existing around us without us actually knowing you're there, right? I feel like that. So then you get into the whole like the veil thing, which is kind of like between dimensions, I guess, right? You would say there's a veil.
Think so.
So in some parts, maybe one bleeds into another. Like, that's what they say shadow people are. They're from another dimension that's very close. It's like the next dimension closest to ours, right? And somehow they know how to get here. We don't know how to get there. At least if we do, we're not.
I'm telling you, it has something to do with our vibrational frequency.
And another thing we watched last night I thought was really good was the New York Post, the interview the dude's doing on Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, yeah.
Because he thought he was going to call the new owner, and the guy probably wouldn't even let him come out there, and instead he's like, come on out here and hang out for a few days, and takes him on the tour, and he really gives him an in detail story about how he came to purchase Skinwalker Ranch, and it's a pretty fascinating story. And just some of the stuff.
It may get better when we see the next part to it.
Right, yeah.
That's what I want to know. What's going to
yet.
happen there.
You guys should check that out. As always, I'm going to leave links to those YouTube videos with references to the ones of the encounters we shared tonight.
Speaking of that,
I have nothing else for tonight.
Links.
Okay, good deal. Ashley is turning in her homework for the week, I guess. Anyway, Happy New Year's, guys. 2022 is a wrap. I mean, if we make it through one more day, we've got 2022 licked. I think we'll probably get to 2023. Okay.
You think?
I think so. I've got faith that we will, and I hope 2023 is as good as 2022. Right?
It's gonna be better.
We hope it's gonna be better, but if it's as good, it's gonna be a good year. But yeah, you guys be safe out there. I know it's a crazy time of year to be out and about. So if you guys
What did I hear? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
I was just gonna say, if you guys are people and like to be out where it's going on at, be safe, because that's
sure.
That's the dangerous places. I'm kind of like, I don't like being around people so much, especially at a time like New Year's Eve. So many people. I'd probably get out for the right reason. But like around where we're at, nah, I'm good, man. I'll just stay home. There's too many people out running around. Like, I don't like traffic and just shoulder to shoulder.
Drunk people?
I can't stand it. I can't stand it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but if you drink around me, you gotta be able to handle your alcohol. You just got to. That's just a rule. I can't be around. I just can't be around. Or if I am around, I'm not going to be a happy camper about it. I'm just, But I don't know.
Keep yourself away from it, because they're there to have fun.
I understand, man. You know that I've been that person in my life. So it's just at this point in my life, I'm just.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just chill, man.
Anyway.
But yeah, Happy New Year. And I'll share the other story I have next week. You guys be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. We'll see you guys then.
Bye.
Later.